The Holy Knights have an ability that makes them truly terrifying, their Ultra Regeneration. Even someone like Zebec was not able to take down a Garling Figureland, even though he had completely torn him apart earlier in battle. Given this, I would say that this regeneration can indeed be considered the greatest strength of the Holy Knights. However, at the same time, it is also something else, something that stands on the other side, namely, their greatest weakness. But why is that? Well, by now, we've already seen several times how the Holy Knights perform in battles against other top-tier characters. We haven't seen too much, but what we have seen speaks volumes. Summers was taken apart by Scopa in a single move. Even on God Valley, he didn't perform much better when Riley attacked him. Maffy was split in two by an attack that wasn't even directly aimed at her. Garling was torn apart by Rox D. Zebec, even though he was supported by the other Holy Knights. Those other Holy Knights who supported Garling didn't fare any better either. What does this tell us? It shows that the Holy Knights would be absolutely beatable for other top tiers, if not for their regeneration. But why do I say that this regeneration is at the same time their greatest weakness? Well, we should ask ourselves why characters like Summers seem to be so bad at defending themselves. Imagine if Scopa had attacked Luffy in the same way he attacked Summers. Luffy would never have suffered the same fate. The same goes for other characters. I can't imagine Katakuri, King, or even Queen getting hit that hard in that situation. So why is Summers different in this regard? Isn't he also a top tier? Why is Maffy different in that regard? The answer probably lies in their regeneration ability. It makes the Holy Knights arrogant and leads to weaknesses. Why bother defending themselves if they can simply regenerate anyway? Pain could be an argument for that. However, I highly doubt that they experience normal sensations of pain. Otherwise, Summers should have been in extreme agony after Scopa attack. So, if pain is not a major problem, or perhaps not a problem at all, for the Holy Knights, then it's quite possible that they simply see no reason to defend themselves. Why would they? They'll just regenerate again. Allowing themselves to be hit could even have a positive effect against most opponents, at least from the Holy Knight's perspective. After all, it's quite demoralizing for the enemy when the person they just defeated simply stands back up. However, most enemies are not the kind who can truly endanger the Holy Knights. But if they're always willing to take hits, when do they ever train their ability to defend themselves? Apparently, far too rarely. That has created a rather interesting situation, I must say. So far, we haven't seen any method that can completely bypass their regeneration. The question now is whether such a method will ever appear. And I'm talking about one that could actually be replicated. For example, I could imagine that Sabo, with his Mera Mera no Mi, the Flame fruit, might be able to truly and permanently take out a Holy Knight. If there's nothing left but ashes, there shouldn't be anything left to regenerate from. That should really be the end. But Sabo is the only one with that fruit. There are similar abilities that could potentially have a comparable effect, but none that can truly be reproduced. Conqueror's Haki is certainly a better option, but still not a universal solution. After all, very few people have access to it. Furthermore, we haven't yet seen Conqueror's Haki completely bypass regeneration. That doesn't mean it can't, but as of now, even Zebec, with all his power and mastery of Conqueror's Haki, hasn't managed to do it. So what could the next stage be? Perhaps Armament Haki alone. But why would that be capable of doing what even Conqueror's Haki cannot? Could it be that in the end, it will all come down to Emu simply being defeated, and that their regeneration will stop because of it? Or perhaps Emu will revoke this ability from their subordinates before being defeated, making them vulnerable as a result. That option seems more plausible to me than the first. Maybe because Emu's power is what sustains their regeneration. But even then, we're left with a difficult situation. It brings us back to the fundamental weakness of the Holy Knights. If their regeneration were to suddenly disappear, what could they possibly do against other top tiers? From what we've observed so far, they're rather poor when it comes to defending themselves. Some Holy Knights might be different, but I believe the majority of them fall into this same pattern. Shamrock might be an exception. Gunko is another special case. She has appeared to be quite competent, especially in terms of defense. However, she isn't exactly a normal Holy Knight either. But let's return to the core situation, and the problem that comes with it. On one hand, the Holy Knights cannot truly be defeated, as long as their regeneration cannot be bypassed. And by that, I mean defeated for good. They can be beaten. Zebec proved that, but Garling simply regenerated afterward. On the other hand, they might become too easy to defeat, at least for other top-tier characters, if their regeneration were to vanish completely. The natural solution would be to find a middle ground. But what would that look like, and how could it be achieved? It's hard to say. Perhaps their regeneration stems from their connection to the Abyss, and the key lies in finding a way to weaken that bond. But how that could possibly work is truly difficult to imagine. Oda has created a truly complex situation, one that's challenging not just for the characters but even for him as a writer. Solving this will be anything but easy, I suspect. But we're talking about Oda, and I have absolute faith that he will find a brilliant way to resolve it, or has perhaps already planned it long ago. In any case, I'm very curious to see what the final explanation will be, because it will almost certainly be something entirely different from what we've seen in previous battles. The fight between Zoro and King might serve as a conceptual parallel, but even that isn't guaranteed, especially since, with these so-called fighting celestial dragons, we're dealing with far more esoteric concepts that naturally alter the rules of battle. The devil fruit abilities of the Holy Knights naturally follow the same rules that Oda has established for devil fruits over the decades. However, even by devil fruit standards, the powers we've seen so far are esoteric in nature. We have the thorn fruit used by Summers, the arrow fruit wielded by Gunko, and the Kirin fruit possessed by Killingham. All three abilities function in their own uniquely mystical ways. Summers, for instance, can create links from his thorns that react to emotions. Gunko, with her arrow fruit, can control others, and perhaps even manipulate fate itself to a certain degree. And then there's Killingham, who possesses a zone-type fruit, yet wields powers connected to dreams and nightmares. It doesn't get much more mystical than that. However, as mentioned, even these devil fruits still follow the fundamental rules of devil fruits. There aren't many of those rules, and some can be stretched, but they do exist. The abilities that appear to stem directly from Emil, however, operate under an entirely different set of rules that we simply don't know. These include things like the summoning circles, the transformations of the Gorosei, and of course, Imu's own transformation, as well as the regeneration and other unknown abilities. When we look directly at Imu, we can identify even more powers. Imu's capable of possessing other beings, as we've seen with Gunko or Saturn, for example. Imu also appears able to manipulate memories. It certainly seemed that way when Gunko suddenly remembered something long forgotten, moments before Imu took control of her. And then there's Imu's ability to transform others into demons. Beyond that, Imu can directly manipulate subordinates, at least to some extent. It's likely that Imu is the reason why the Gorosei, and even Gunko, do not age. After all, Imu was capable of making Saturn age instantaneously, until nothing remained but a skeleton. All these abilities obey rules we don't understand, and that creates a situation unlike anything we've seen before. The upcoming battle against Imu will naturally be different, because it involves variables that have never existed in previous fights. That, in my view, makes the situation all the more fascinating. It also fits perfectly with Luffy, whose Nika abilities now allow him to bend, or rather stretch, the established rules of the world itself. But what do you think? What's your opinion about the Holy Knights, their weakness, and the future direction Oda might take with them and their mysterious powers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And with that, see you next time.